Hello, everybody. So, welcome back to season one, episode 7 of the Let's Talk with Kimberly Nicole podcast. And today's topic, let's talk about grief. So, before we get started, because I was going to dive right in, if you are not already following us on our YouTube podcast, please be sure to follow us at underscore Let's Talk Wellness. That's at underscore Let's Talk Wellness. And if you are not following us and you're on Instagram at underscore Let's Talk Podcast KN. And that is underscore Let's Talk Podcast KN as in Kimberly Nicole. You want to follow us because you'll get updates when content comes out, such as this, such as new episodes. When they drop, you will get updates. So let's get that out of the way. Let's make sure that you are following us. And now let's jump into today's topic. So, as we are in the holiday season, grief is a big thing, right? Excuse me, grief is really a big thing at any time. But as we're in the holiday season, I think that is sometimes when we feel it the most. And sometimes when we feel it unexpectedly or without even wanting to feel it, right? Because the holidays are such a time that usually loved ones gather together. And so when we gather, sometimes that reminds us of the people that are not at the celebrations that have been in the celebrations in the past. And so when we look around the room and over the last couple of years, or even beyond the last couple of years, we've just lost a lot of people to senseless violent acts of violence, COVID, natural disasters, different things over the last couple of years. So it seems maybe more heightened. But if we just really look around the room at our gatherings this holiday season, there are, for all of us, there are going to be faces that we are no longer seeing that at one time we did see. So that can cause a sense of grief. And so without assuming that everyone is aware of what grief is, or even just to provide a concise definition, here is actually a written definition, and you'll see me look down. I have some notes that I'm looking at. So, grief can be defined as deep and poignant distress caused by or as by bereavement. And so bereavement means that it's the loss of someone that you love. So when, this is the first example I thought of on your job at work, you may hear bereavement leave. So that's leave after you've experienced the loss of someone that you love, leave that of absence or time of absence that you take from work. Grief can also be defined as a cause of such suffering. So we think about suffering. That's another context of grief, but yeah, a cause of such suffering. And then there's even a definition that involves the use of deep seated loss or deep seated pain when we think about grief. And so that's exactly what grief is that's why we feel it so intensely, because it is a deep seated pain that we're feeling when we think about the loss of those that were once in our lives. And not only do we grieve people, but we also grieve places and experiences. So in my mind, I went to elementary school when we talk about nouns, person, places, and things. So we can grieve people, we can grieve places, and we can grieve things. That's something that I don't think we talk about very widely, but you can grieve, of course, individual people. That's a common known thing. But you can also grieve experiences. You can grieve if you had a tradition with a friend and you all no longer do that tradition anymore for whatever reason. If the friendship has shifted, because you can also grieve friendships when you've lost friendships. That's another story. So let me try to stay on topic with this. But you can, if you have a tradition with a friend and now you all no longer do that, you could grieve the loss of that tradition. You could also grieve if that friendship has shifted. You could grieve how that friendship is no longer what it once used to be, whether it's shifted or it's completely broken up. So when friendships break up, this is something that I just recently saw on social media, and I've seen it a couple times, but I actually saw it this week. And it was someone posting about how we don't talk about how friendship breakups, how to navigate through friendship breakups. And some of the comments were saying things such as, friendship breakups are even more painful than romantic or other, romantic breakups, whether it be, partner, a spouse, long-term relationship. friendship breakups are very painful, and we don't really talk about that because we live in a culture where we say things like, no new friends, or I cut you off, my cutoff game is good. So therefore when people do get the rotary scissors, they get cut off, we don't really have a lot of conversation around how to navigate that, whether that cutoff be, for a well-meant reason, or whether it be, jumping to conclusions. Whatever it looks like, cutting people off is painful, on both sides. Because even, let's be clear, that if it was an unhealthy relationship, it was still a relationship that took up space in your life. And so when that relationship no longer exists, that is a space that's now in your life that was once filled. So you're missing something. So you're going to feel the void and the pain of missing something. The intensity level of it just kind of depends on a lot of different factors. You as a person, your relationship to the person, the depth of the relationship, the depth of what caused the breakup or shift. Those are all variables that can determine how deep the pain is. But the pain is still there no less, whether or not it was a physical loss of that person, or the relationship shifted or broke up. And when I say relationship in this context, the friendship shifted or broke up. You can grieve the loss of a thing. So let's talk about a job. If you are employed somewhere, whether you like the job or not, if you lose the job for whatever reason, if you're laid off, or even if you are the one that decides to terminate the position because you have a better opportunity, or you just, you've made a decision to step out on faith and you just terminating the opportunity without knowing what's coming, you still are going to be grieving the loss of that job. Because again, anything that is a part of our lives, it's a part of our routine, it becomes a part of our lives. And so if we are missing that part of our routine, or that part of our lives, then we are going to, it's a missing space. I like to sometimes think in very practical terms. So if I have 3 cups of water in front of me and I pour the water out of one of them, and the other 2 cups still have water, I'm now missing something. Or let's say I have, no, let's say I have 3 bottles of water in front of me. And so I take one bottle away, and now I have 2 bottles, where there's a space where one bottle once existed. So that space is a void. I'm missing something. And depending on how much that water bottle meant to me can determine how deep that I feel that space. And when I say feel, FEEL, not feel, FILL. I can feel the void or the pain from that space being there that was once not there. And that's going to be attached to how much that water bottle meant to me. And of course, that's just a silly practical example, but you can, the analogy of, take that as a person that's in your life, and then they are no longer in your life. Well, it's a void. Anytime that something is taken away, it's a void. It's no longer there. So there's space. And the question is, what happens? What do we do with that space? We're gonna feel, FELL. We're gonna feel the pain, or feel some type of way. And we're gonna talk a little bit more about that some type of way, but we're going to feel the impact. Okay. And that's going to be directly connected to how our relationship, or what meaning we attach to what was in that space. You can't move. I feel led to keep saying this, so maybe it's something, someone's going to have a breakthrough moment here, but you can't move something and have a space and not expect to have some type of feeling about it. Now let's talk about feeling it. The FILLING. Now I'm country. I'm from North Carolina, so look, these feeling it's gonna all sound the same, okay? And it's gonna have a country twang on it, but we often try to feel, FILL, the space, so that we don't have to feel, FELL, the void. And so that's where we can get in trouble. It's not always bad to feel it, look, I'm gonna be spelling all day. So we often try to feel the space, FILL, so we don't have to fill, F-E-L-L, the space, which again is not always bad to try to fill it, but you need to F-E fill it first. You don't need to F-I fill it to avoid F-E filling it, because if we're looking at coping skills with grief and loss, we have to make sure that we're not avoiding feeling, F-E-L-L, feeling our feelings. So because grief can come up in so many different ways. And so where I was going to go next was, it made me think about a story. So I'll just share the story as an example. So I heard a story one time about a woman who lost her son. Her son passed away. And so immediately after he passed away, as what often happens, okay, life still goes on. We're still handling the day-to-day business. And even if we're taking that break from day-to-day business, like we took some time off work, we're still having to handle the arrangements for a funeral, a celebration of life, however we're going to move forward with celebrating our loved one that was once here. So in that time, a lot of times you're just, doing what you got to do. This is an example, way I like to describe it. You're just putting your head down, and you're just continuing to go, and you're doing whatever you need to do in terms of like making arrangements for funeral, celebration of life, burial. It's still business going on. So she went through all of that, and then even after the funeral, like I don't think she really had time to stop and grieve. Well, it was about 5 years later. Now I don't know everything that happened in that gap time, but about 5 years later, she was in a department store around the holiday season. And during this time, for whatever reason, she was shopping, going about her, not to say for whatever reason, she was shopping, going about her business, and she broke down and burst into tears in the middle of the store. And so what happened for her in that moment was she had had some delayed grief, perhaps, which is when you're not able to grieve immediately after the grief, after the moment of loss happens, or within, like I don't like normal, reasonable maybe period of time after the loss had occurred. She was no longer, or she wasn't able to grieve during that time. And so 5 years later, she's in this department store. It's the holiday season, and she probably sees all these reminders that make her think about her son. And then that triggered that release of grief. And so I like that example. And when I say I like it, I feel like it's a teachable moment, because so many people are out there right now that have experienced grief, and they haven't really had a chance to stop, or either they've tried to bury it down. And the dangerous thing with that is whatever is in you is going to come up. It's got to come up one way or another. That's not a real gross example, but I was going to say, like, think about when you're sick. Like, think about when you eat something bad. It's got to come out. If you have a cold, you got all that mucus, it's got to come out. Like, you can do, this all day long. Ooh, excuse me. You can do that all day long, but it's the mucus got to come out. So it's the same thing like with grief. If you're constantly like pushing it down, it's got to come out. And it can come out in many different ways. It can come out in physical manifestations. You can literally get physically sick. You can have headaches, nausea, heart palpitations, sweating, chills, sleeplessness, insomnia, restless sleep when you're like constantly burying down grief. Or you can have some emotional symptoms. You can have emotional outbursts of tears, extreme sadness, irritability. You can have a mixture of the symptoms. You can have some social changes. So you might withdraw from friends and family. You might cling on to them more. There's a lot of different ways that grief is going to manifest if it's not resolved, or if it's not felt and dealt with in a healthy way. So when we think about grieving, of course, we can't talk about grief without the 5 or 7 stages of grief. Most recently, 7 stages of grief have come out, and I'm just going to actually read over what the 5 are and what the 7 are. So we're looking at the 5 stages of grief, and these are not experienced in a linear way. Even though I'm going to give you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you can go in and out of each stage. You can skip stages. But the 5 stages of grief are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And so it's not always that we, initially go through denial. You may initially become angry and you may begin to bargain. Or you may initially immediately go into a stage of depression from the loss. Your heart is overwhelmed. You're having extremely low mood for a period of time. Or you might immediately go to acceptance, but then, hey, you may accept it in the moment and then jump back to denial. So you don't go through the stages in a linear way. I remember, because grief is very near and dear to my heart, and we've all experienced grief in one way or another. But I remember a very personal experience for me with grief was losing my younger sister. So it was, it's crazy. Wow, I'm like, it was 3 years ago. It was 2020. It was right before the pandemic. I always tell people I had my own personal pandemic right before the pandemic, and I didn't even really realize the depths of the pandemic initially when it happened because my sister passed away, or I found out that she passed away on March 10th, of 2020. Yeah, 2020. So I was at work. I wasn't at work when I found out, but setting the stage, I was at work. It was Tuesday, and I was just going through, life as normal. I think I remember having a conversation with one of my friends. I had texted my sister maybe like the day before and didn't hear anything, but I didn't think anything of it because my sister went into like she could be a loner. So she went into stages where if she didn't feel like being bothered, we weren't going to hear from her. So that we knew that. And so it wasn't odd to me that I hadn't heard back from her yet. Um, and I was actually planning on calling her, I think, like that afternoon after I got off work, the same day that I found out. But yeah, I was going about my life. I was at work. I think I had a conversation with one of my friends. I remember. I can't remember. There was a reason that I said that, but I had a conversation, and I can't even remember what it was. But it was like a real high conversation. It was like a really high mood. Like maybe something philosophical, revelational. It was something really good. One of my real good girlfriends, and so female friends, and so um that was that. And I remember I left for lunch a little later that day. And I always say that God is so strategic because I normally would go to lunch at 1. I remember that someone came into the office at like 12:47, 12:48, and I was like, yeah, I'll see him. And so I saw the person and I didn't even try to cut it short, even though usually if I'm hungry, it might be a quick appointment and then, I'll schedule a follow up. But yeah, I saw them we ended up talking for a good period of time. I didn't lose my focus due to hunger. But I remember leaving work after that to go home for lunch and heat up leftovers. And so I think I had just heated up my food. I don't remember, but my dad called me or I missed the call. I don't know why I can't remember the details now. It's not the major part of the story, so it's okay. But I remember my dad was the one that called me and he was like, "Are you sitting down? Or no, are you at home?" And no, maybe are you at work? Is what he asked me. And I was like, no, I'm home. And he was like, I have to tell you something. And I was like, well, can you tell me over the phone? And he was like, no, I need to see you in person. And so I was like, okay. And if you know me, I'm one that's like, if you have to tell me something, just tell me. I don't like, I gotta tell you something, and then it's 10 days later or 2 minutes, but like just go ahead and say it all in the same sentence. And so he told me the news. Well, yeah, he told me the news, and I will never forget, like, I was, walking down the stairs at my, place at the time, in my house at the time, and I grabbed, like, the banister, but I was, like, at the same time, I literally did not believe what I was hearing. Like, I literally thought that I had, I guess, shifted to some alternative place. Like I was out of touch for reality, for lack of a better way to put that, for a moment, because I just literally was like, no, no, it was literally kind of like I had transitioned out of my own body, I guess, maybe. And I was just kind of like, no, but I was super calm at the same time. But I was like, I immediately went into denial. And so I remember he was like, I'm coming where you are. And so he hung up the phone. And I remember, this is going to sound like the most random thing, but I was holding on to the banister and I walked up and down the stairs, like not even the full, it was about maybe 4 stairs. I walk up, walk back down. And I remember I was holding on to that banister for like dear life. And I just felt like no. And I think I even said no. And I didn't even cry in that moment, which, I share that to say that we respond to grief in different ways, and that's okay. Tears were not my initial reaction. It was an extremely calm, but I felt like I went instantly into like denial. Like I literally, I guess my body was like, went to protective mode. It was like, no, this ain't really happening. Like, cause I remember like, no, no. And even when my dad got there and we called, we called the police officer together. And when we called, I remember I went into work mode. I went into true Kim mode. Like, let's just figure out what's going on. Let's get to the bottom of it. And I remember just asking a bunch of questions, and part of it was me being me and asking questions just to get facts. And then another part of it was I was like, this is not real. Until I see it, I won't believe it. And I remember even like he was like, does she have a gap? And my sister always had the cutest gap. I had a little gap. She had like a bigger gap, but it was so cute. And so I remember like when he said that, like in my heart, that's I think for me when I literally knew and I accepted. I didn't necessarily move into the acceptance stage of grief, but I accepted that this is really her. And I remember just like this sheet of paper, I probably have it to this day, it was the back of an envelope. It was the first thing that I could grab was some mail. And so I grabbed the envelope and I was writing all the answers to the questions up there. They were probably all out of order, but I was just writing information. And so I remember thinking, like, I didn't really know what to do next. I was like, do we go see her? Like, what are we supposed to do? Like, do I have the capacity to see her? And for us, I was gonna say luckily, but I don't know if this was a luckily thing or not, to be honest. We couldn't see her because she had already the decomposition, she had already started to decompose, so we couldn't um see her. But I think again, God is strategic. I want to be careful with my words, but I think that may have been for a reason. I because like I said, I know that once I heard about the gap and all the other information I got, it was something about me hearing about that gap that I knew that was the moment that I accepted that they ain't nobody lying to me. This has really happened. And not that I thought people were lying, but I just did not I could not really like cognitively wrap my mind around this is actually happening. And it was so sudden as well. So I share that to say that we all have our reactions to grief can, look different, and moving through the stages can. And so for me, in that moment, I definitely went into denial. I guess we could say I went into a bout of acceptance, like accepting the reality of it. And then from there, I did, well, no, actually, I went into denial and then I went into bargaining during that time where I was holding the banister and walking down the stairs. I went into bargaining because I remember I was like, God, I'll be a better bigger sister, a big sister. I should have called her. I'll do better. I'll call her every day. Just bring her back. Like I went through all that. And then when I was getting the information and when he said that part about the gap, I went into acceptance. Um, Anger, I've been in and out of anger since it's happened. And this was 2020, but a lot of the anger, I'll say now we're in 2023. Most recently, I can't say that I've really dealt with a lot of anger around her passing. I'm not that I'm cognitively aware of because the anger can manifest in other things as well. Um, but I will say, like, there were bouts of times, like initially after, and probably in that year, next couple of months, where I was angry and I was like, "Why did you leave me here?" And I can remember even when we were like planning for my sister's funeral. And I remember it was just my parents couldn't agree on some things, and it was just chaotic between them. And I was just like, why did you leave me here with this? Like I remember thinking that to my sister, um, or about her even in her absence. Like I was like, yo, why you leave me here with this? Like I had to deal with this. And she was probably like, girl, I already knew. Like you knew it ain't nothing different. I just ain't here, with you now, but and physically, but yeah, so I did go through the anger, and then with the depression. So for me, the sadness, I remember even in the days immediately after her passing, I just wanted to sleep, or rest. I just wanted to like lay down a lot. I remember saying I wanted to take a nap, and even now, sometimes just in general, if I'm sad, I'll want to go to sleep or take a nap. But so I mean, every time I say I want to take a nap or go to sleep, doesn't mean that I'm sad, but that's one way that sadness manifests for me. I will just be like, yeah, I just want to go to sleep. Because I remember even in the time, like the next day, one of my good friends had called to check on me and was like, how are you doing? And I was like, I just want to take a nap. And he was like, take a nap. And I was like, no, I got to do all this stuff. We're going through all the planning and getting everything together and trying to stay in work mode. But yeah, for me, sadness and depression did not necessarily look like tears, but it looked like just wanting to sleep, wanting to rest. Because I remember even one time when my parents were over at my house during the time, they were downstairs and I was upstairs in my bed wrapped up in a blanket with TV on. Probably not even really watching the TV, but it was a comfort and I was just laying in the bed. Um, so now if we talk about the 7 stages of grief, um, that's shock, denial, anger, bargaining, and depression. So the same 5 stages. And then we've added on reconstruction and acceptance. So shock, well, not the same 5 stages, sorry, shock is added to that. It's that initial shock that you may go into before denial. But again, you don't have to move through these stages in a linear way. You can move through these stages um however, it's not going to always be in a linear way because it is shocking to find out that someone that you love has passed away. Um, and there's even stages of grief when we talk about like changes. There's different models out there. I'm going to try to link one in the show notes, like different stages of grief when we talk about like changes at work, big changes at work, or even just whatever, whatever's big to you. So I'm going to try to link that in there as well. Um, when we go through the 7 stages, adding on talking about that reconstruction and the shock that's added to the 5. So that initial shock or whenever, which I say initial shock, but you might feel it at another time or you might feel it again. But the shock is probably one of the more static ones that you're gonna feel really in the beginning because it's such a shocking, like off kilter experience to hear that someone has passed away. You no longer have a job, especially like when you didn't see these things coming. And even sometimes when you see them coming, it doesn't always make them easier, and you still go through grieving them. And so then the reconstruction, or also sometimes known as an upward turn, is the term kind of after you go through that depression. If you are going through them in a linear way, then you might go into like finally you're beginning to go into acceptance, but haven't accepted it yet, but you're able to see the quote unquote bright side of things, or your mood is starting to upturn. You may even find yourself saying things like, well, they wouldn't want me to be, my loved one that's passed away, insert their name, wouldn't want me to be, sad, or would want me to continue on and live my life to the fullest. But whatever it looks like for you, just being able to and reconstructing your life. Now you're learning how to live without them here in the physical. You may even begin to reconstruct your identity. You're reconstructing things as you once knew them. So those are the 7 stages, and I'll also put them below in the notes. So to wrap up this episode, I do want to give you a couple of tips and some ways to support yourself and others that you love during the holidays if you are experiencing grief. So one way that you can support people, thing that you can do for yourself is taking care of yourself. Making sure that you're eating well, getting apt sunlight, all the different things, surrounding yourself with a support system. You can also make sure that you are aware of, try to be as aware as possible of your triggers during the holiday season. And then try to make sure that you create a routine and create new traditions that are healthy and conducive to you grieving in a healthy way. And so I'll also go, I don't want this episode to be too long, so I'll also go into a little more detail or potentially do a part two, go into more detail in the show notes. But I do want to thank you all for tuning in today. And again, follow me at underscore let's talk wellness on YouTube. And we will definitely come back with more content. See you all around. Peace.